All right, then. This is Discover the Word, the Broken Way 5.
Okay, so yesterday, Ann, you were talking to us about living Jesus out in the world in our brokenness and
in little ways, right?
in little ways,
Yeah.
little tiny ways.
Everyday things.
Everyday 99-cent things
Yeah,
all the
right.
time. Okay. But sometimes, aren't there big things that
He's
kind of need to
calling
happen?
us to big things.
Yeah.
It's easier, though, when you can start with little steps, right?
It is.
Well, and
Small
it's
steps
easier-
right where you are.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also easier if the Lord lets somebody else do the big things and just lets you do the little things.
And it might be easier to really push this when God like writes it on the wall. Go and do this. But
He always
most
does
of the
that,
time,
right?
yeah,
I mean, he always
right.
puts it on the wall. All you have to do is read it.
Yeah, most of the time we're like, I can't tell if this is from God,
Yeah.
this big thing. This feels like it might be my idea, or I'm scared.
If it's a big thing, we usually kind of think, no, this can't be the Lord, because he would want somebody certainly
More
better than me.
competent than me to
Yeah,
be doing this.
sure.
Exactly. Last March, the Lord called me to Iraq 3 weeks after the 21 were martyred in Libya, decapitated by ISIS. And I did not want to go at all.
No
and
kidding.
my husband said, you are more safer in the will of God in Iraq than if you stayed home and being outside of the will of God. If God's calling you to go and do this, you need to go ahead and do this.
Wait a minute. Somebody is saying, did he call you on the phone?
Well,
I mean-
no, someone invited me to go to Iraq and spend 4 or 5 days there. And I told my husband, there is no way.
Okay, so somebody else called you.
Yes.
But you recognize within that invitation.
I didn't. My husband said, you know what? I think the Lord is actually calling you to literally go, because I had said there is
Wow.
no way I'm going to
pushed
go ahead and
back,
do it.
yeah.
He did push back.
No, you did. You pushed back, and he.
He said, no, I think the Lord really actually is calling you to go. And
Because you said no.
I said no. There was no way. I mean, I'm the mother of 7, well, at that point, 6 children. There was no way I was going to head into Iraq.
So so the other day when you told us that you and your husband do argue
Oh,
sometimes,
yeah,
this
there
is
was
a
an
good example of
arguing
that.
moment.
I thought you were just trying to be agreeable. And you say, oh, I'm like a...
No, and I didn't want to go at all. But yes, if the Lord is calling you, we talked earlier about sometimes a life of faith is going to feel like fear. And in the moment, it didn't feel, I didn't feel very brave at all. But taking steps of obedience and faith, I was in Iraq 4.5 days, sat with women whose husbands and brothers had been killed in front of them by ISIS. And they had to decide in the moment, I only have 2 arms, which of my children can I grab and escape from ISIS up Mount Sinjar? Which of my children, 5, 6, 7 years old, do I not know where they are in the world right now? And looking into the eyes of women telling me these stories. And all I could think was, that could be me. Something could happen in the world. A crisis could happen. And I could be found with losing all that we own in the world, having to escape. Who was going to use their voice to help me in a situation where these women, they'd never, no education. The only way they could write their signature was their fingerprint. And it took me back to Esther. If you turn to Esther 4:14. Wow. Lisa, can you grab that one for us?
Sure. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place.
Yeah.
But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this.
For such a time as this.
Now, who's speaking?
Mordecai is saying it to Esther. And Esther finds herself in the palace. She finds herself in this position of quote unquote power. And I guess I'd really realized after I'd written down 1,000 things I was grateful for.
That was for another book.
Yes. 1,000 gifts had really explored that. Look at all of the blessings, all of the gifts that I've been given. I was in the palace. I had been given so much from God. A gift is always meant to be given. It's not meant to be hoarded at all. It's always meant to be broken and given like bread. I was like Esther. I was in the palace. I was given a position that meant I was to risk everything for those outside the gate. And the thing that Mordecai says that really gets me, you read it, Elisa, that yes, deliverance for those outside the gate may come from somebody else. If you don't use your position.
Because God's going to take care of
God's going to
justice
take care of those
in this
people outside the
world.
gate. But you and your family will perish. If you don't use your position for those like those refugees women, for those who are desperate for someone to help them, if you don't use your position, you will perish. You will be like the living dead. You will live meaningless, hollow lives that are not abundant, that are not fulfilled, that aren't what God called you to at all. I really believe that for such a time as now, you are called to where you are with all the gifts, with all the position, with all the, we don't think we have power at all. But we're in the West. We have been given so much
in comparison.
education.
And we take it so for granted.
We do.
Yeah.
If you've got food in your fridge, a roof over your head, anything in a bank account, you're in the top 1-2% of all of the people on the planet. You are Esther in the palace, called for such a time as now to risk it all for those outside the gate, to be like bread, broken and given. And if you choose not to risk everything, you yourself will spiritually perish.
You feel so strongly about this, you're beating the table. I hear you.
So, Anne,
Yeah.
but why are we reading this story now about
Yeah.
Esther? I
Yes.
mean, you began to tell us about these women.
Yep.
I mean, what does Esther have to do with?
You are Esther to use everything that you've been given for those like those refugee women, for the people who are needy and desperate, for you to reach out and be bread for them in their starvation. For us as a family, that actually meant in Canada, we can go ahead and privately sponsor a refugee family. So we went ahead and worked with Mennonite Central Committee to go ahead and bring over a Syrian refugee family from Aleppo, a mother and father, 4 kids, worked with our church community, our broader community, 12 churches from town all came together. So total, we're bringing over our family, churches are bringing 3 other families, so 4 Syrian refugee families. We are like Esther, called for such a time as now to use all the gifts and blessings, the bread God has given us, to be broken and given for those starving outside the gate.
So that happened after you went
Yeah.
to Iraq and visited and sat down with those
So
women.
if it wasn't enough to be called to go to Iraq and minister,
Yeah.
then God calls
Yeah.
you to bring a family
That was
back.
part of the story. Part of it was I came back from Iraq, went ahead and told the story of those women on my blog. And just over a week and a half, we raised almost $1 million that went back to Iraq, that was given in microloans out to those women to start their own small businesses, to take care of their children, to get them in school, to have a roof over their head, for them to have hope and a future. So that was just lots of families responding to the stories I wrote of those women. And they were like bread, broken and given. That money went back to Iraq. And then we as a family personally decided to go ahead and sponsor a refugee family.
So that would qualify as a big thing.
I think
That
both
was
of them
sort of
do.
a big thing.
That would be a
And
big
you may
thing.
not be called to
No.
that at all, but there might be a women's shelter in your community. There might be a crisis pregnancy center in your community. There might be something in your community. You're called to be an Esther right where you are, to risk in some way for those who are on the outside, marginalized, oppressed, voiceless, that you're
Yeah.
called to be broken and given for them.
Now, in your case, that all though had to sort of unfold, didn't it? Because I was sitting here trying to figure out, okay, now you're hearing these incredible stories
Yes.
of these women. What could you say to them? But you didn't. It didn't all have to happen right then.
It
did
didn't all and you know what? After I came back from Iraq, I was heartbroken. It took me over a month to write those women's stories before I posted them on the blog. I needed time to process the brokenness. It wasn't an immediate response for me at all.
What did you say to them when you were there?
Exactly. I wanted them to know that they were entrusting to me their stories. I wasn't there as a voyeuristic experience at all, that I was just curious, but that I was going to carry their stories back to women, families in North America, tell their stories and beg people to respond to their need. It took me a while to do that, to process how do I tell this story in a way that the reader would feel the way I felt.
So you didn't go there to teach them anything.
No, I came only to carry their stories, steward their stories back, to be a voice for those women in a situation where, did anyone see them? Did God see them at all?
It seems like what you're modeling is that we pay attention first to how we have been
Yes.
blessed, because we focus more on what we lack
And
rather
that's,
than what
so
we
this
have.
is a really organic story for me. This is like I'm literally trying to live this out. So 1,000 gifts, I was paying attention to all of the gifts and the blessings.
But
Yes.
usually when we have it, then we got to protect it, right?
Oh, that's-
No, that's the thing. It's like the Dead Sea. All of the blessings flow in, and unless it's a tributary to flow out, to be broken and given out into the world, unless those blessings flow out into the world, we die. We become empty and lifeless and barren. The gifts have to flow on out into the world.
And I love that it's not a shame fest thing of, okay, you've got all these gifts, and now you better go.
No.
You know, you're speaking in this in such inviting terms of, can we steward that, recognize it, and then steward that blessing so that others can be filled and will be the benefactors as well.
And we are the ones
Beneficiaries.
fulfilled in deep, unexpected, unlikely ways that the Lord blesses us as we bless others.
In unexpected ways.
Completely
So
unexpected
you didn't
ways.
necessarily know how this was going to work
Oh,
out.
at all. When I was sitting there, I didn't think, we're going to go ahead and sponsor a refugee family. That was like not on my radar in any way. Actually, in the moment, all I had was a lot of tears. And I really believe that shared tears is multiplied healing. I just sat with the women and cried. And sometimes that in itself is being broken and given, just the ministry of presence to somebody. I believe withness, being with someone, is part of breaking the brokenness in the world. God is Emmanuel. He is God with us. We just want to know we're not alone. So in that moment with those women, I was just sharing in their grief, with lamenting with them. I didn't really know what the story was going to look like at all.
Well, you probably weren't thinking of Esther at that
Oh,
point either. were
no.
you?
At that moment, though, I really believed, I have so much. I've been given so much. What do I do? I didn't know what it looked like, but I definitely knew that I had so much more and they had nothing. And what if it was me who had lost my husband, any means of resources, and I had these children to take care of?